that concludes the welcome. We're going to move on, like I said, to our first panel session, namely barriers and drivers to the adoption of on-farm technology. Please remember you can tweet us using the hashtag AgriConnect2020 or submit questions in the chat. I am delighted to introduce Chief Technical Officer for Agri-EPI, Dr. Shamal Mohammed, to facilitate the session. Shamal is a leading expert in digital agriculture with a strong passion for transforming the industry by developing novel and practical solutions using smart technologies to help farmers and producers optimize food production and minimize environmental impacts. Shamal worked for Origin Enterprise PLC, AHDB, and more recently Agri, where he was head of integrated crop technology and later regional manager for soil nutrition and precision agriculture. Currently being based in Cranfield, Shamal works with Agri-EPI partners to lead the journey to innovate technology in the agriculture sector by providing farmers and producers with a wide range of scientifically robust, commercially viable capabilities. So Shamal, it's over to you. Can I please ask all panelists to come off mute with your videos on, like I think you are, so I will hand over.
Thank you very much, Kathy, and welcome to everyone and also to my panelists today. As we heard from Tom, there are many challenges facing the industry and the food production system in the UK, climatic challenges, weather challenges, economic and profitability, as well as political challenges facing the industry. And we need to have a better and more resilient food system in order to be able to respond to these challenges and helping farmers to be more efficient, reducing cost of production, be more profitable, but also be environmentally more sustainable. And this is where there is a role for technology and how technology can provide tools to the toolset of farmers to be able to be more sustainable as well as be more productive. And in order to bring these changes into the industry and new technologies, there is always drivers and barriers, and this is the focus of today's discussion for this session. And I'm glad to welcome back Tom Bradshaw, Vice President of NFU, but also a farmer, Sophie Alexandra, a farmer from Hemsworth farm, as well as Antony Yousefian from Bardsley, England, and the top food growers in England, in Kent. Thank you very much for joining me today, and I would like to start with a bit of introduction about yourself and what kind of technologies are you currently using on your farm. Then we can go into a more open discussion around the drivers and barriers. I would like to start with Tom.
Good morning again. So on our farm here, we've generally been reasonably early adopters of technology, whether that be precision steering, whether it be spatial variability, so precision application of nutrients and nitrogen, phosphate, potash, and things like that. We are broadacre combinable crops, so growing wheat, barley, oats, beans, peas, basically anything that will go for a combine. So the more targeted robotics is not something that we are, that we're utilising. We're using auto section control, auto guidance, those sorts of technologies which we're very familiar with. I think one of the things we have seen on our business here is that through being early adopters, it hasn't always returned or given us a return on that investment. Definitely the steering machines have, the auto section control has, but actually the targeted application of nutrients, I'm not always convinced that there is actually an economic benefit to doing that. And so because we can doesn't always mean we should, but actually that's a fine balance. And I think that's where the data and the evidence is so critical to make sure that we can really justify that investment.
Thank you, Tom. Sophie?
Hello, good morning everyone from Dorset. I farm about 1,000 acres. It's an organic system. So by definition, it's low input. But that does not mean we don't want to adopt agri-tech. I'm just wondering where the normal farm machinery and data collection ends and agri-tech begins. What was cutting edge is now fairly standard. I rely on my excellent contractor for precision farming field operations. And I think they have done a great deal to improve the yield of organic crops. The crop establishment is really aided by that. So I'm permanently looking for cutting edge solutions, but I've been an Agri-EPI farm for about 3 years now. And it is hard to find something that genuinely adds value. So more discussion on that later.
Yes,
thank you.
Absolutely, thank you. Antony, over to you.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Excellent. Someone on their headphones. Hi, I'm Antony Yousefian. I'm the Ag Tech Director here at Bardsley, England. As Shamal introduced, Bardsley, England is based in Kent. We are probably about the second largest top fruit grower in the country. We grow over 2,000 acres, predominantly apples and pears, but we also are in plums, apricots, a little bit of soft fruit production in strawberries. My role as Ag Tech Director essentially is around this theme, essentially is trying to lower the barrier for technology adoption and certainly trying to work closer with technology providers to get them on farm. And we've been kind of through a bit of a journey ourselves, and you know, what technology have we deployed on farm? Ben Bardsley, who is a 5th generation farmer, who is the MD of the business, and when he came to the business 5 or 6 years ago, he invested in technology post-harvest and definitely saw the benefits of that. And post-harvest technology has been through a bit more of a development versus the pre-harvest. So the value that it brings to the business is quite well developed. So it's much easier, but still, we've certainly seen the benefits of that. So we're using machine vision technology in the harvest. Using hyperspec, multispec to help us grade the fruit, but then also using a lot of automation. But then obviously we kind of bring us back to kind of pre-harvest and what technology are we using pre-harvest? We're focusing initially on data collection, using technology to help us collect more data and certainly collect it in a more structured way. So for example, in-field sensing, you know, classic kind of climate sensors, understanding exactly what's happening in our orchards. And essentially what we're trying to do is build a digital twin of every single field or orchard to understand what is going on, because we get to the end of the season, something's happened, that orchard hasn't performed, and then when you ask someone what went wrong there, you can never usually get an answer back, not a correct answer. So can we make sure that we've got all those variables digitized? So we're also using other sensors like remote sensors, like satellite data on all those orchards, as well as, this is more the interesting thing for me, is understanding what's the trees doing. So we're using technology that's out there to like sensors on the trees to understand the sap flow, the photosynthesis. But and I think Tom mentioned it, but I think the ultimate sensing or technology we need to push forward is in the soil. It's a very complex system. The whole agriculture system is complex, but that is the engine which we need to understand more. So I think we'll go into the kind of discussion in a second, but this is an area where I think we definitely need to kind of lower the barrier, increase adoption in this kind of area, and an understanding around the soil.
Thank you very much. I think that's really good and a good introduction to different businesses in agriculture, and then we look at it in a different angle as well. But for me, I think one of the question is, you mentioned, Sophie, some of the technologies might be at cutting edge 20 years ago, now is almost a standard. So what is the motive behind that sort of adoption? What is it sort of, I mean, you mentioned, Antony, about some of the reason you're trying to almost have a digital twin of every single field and almost sensing the single tree and in orchard. But what is the motive in your case, Sophie, in the organic sector? What's the reason you see for adopting a new technology? And you mentioned value, but what else is there that can encourage farmers to adopt new technologies?
So I suppose, yeah, what's our biggest motivations for using ag tech? I mean, it's visibility. As an ultimate crux initially, it's visibility. We're working over 2,000 acres, 800 hectares. We've only got so many farm managers. We can only be in so many places all at once. So it's increasing our visibility on what's going on. And ultimately, you know, I'm not a grower. I've come into this sector and I've looked at it and comparing it to other sectors. There's so much going on. It's so complex, yet the visibility in the business is quite limited. And I'm talking about, you know, understanding what's all going on in all those situations. So, I mean, our mission now, certainly at Bardsley, England, is definitely centered around the carbon footprint. We know that we, in much of our orchards, we are carbon, if you want to get positive, or climate, you know, carbon negative. So we're sequestering carbon, but we could do that so much better. And we've realized when we do improve that, when we do put more energy into the soil, put more carbon into the soil, as Tom mentioned, it is a carbon sink. We actually get less risks. We get less pest pressure. We get less disease pressure. So it's usually, how can we use the technology to understand that more, encourage that? That's really interesting. So we're using the technology to increase visibility. And once we've got that visibility, drive better intelligence, right? So we've got that data all in one place, make that intelligent decision better. And then ultimately the speed of it, Sometimes our decision making can be, although you have to wait till it hits the grading machine. We've pulled all our apples off the tree, we've put it through the grader, and we won't make our next decision until we know exactly what our yield is, because we're too scared. But if we can bring forward those decisions, that unlocks, you know, a lot of value. And people don't look at, normally people look at it from where can I cut costs? But it's also, I suppose it's like using the data to increase your top line, if I want to call it that. So that's how we look at it. So that's our main motivations, I would say.
Right. Thank you. Can I move to Sophie? And probably it's a different sort of a food system in organic sector comparing to the top food. So what's the motive in your case and your sector for technologies?
I think the motives are very similar. I mean, like Antony, it's about a whole farm system. So I'm not, my farm's in a rotation. It is 3-4 years in a very diverse grazing system with a dairy enterprise that's just at the elementary stages. And then the cereals. So the desire to find the right technology is about improving everything, about getting the engine, the whole farm engine, to be optimized. I'd say optimized rather than maximized, because I'm on light soil. I'm never going to be a 15-ton wheat an acre hectare. But I want the engine of the whole system to work really, really slickly well, and I want to know what's going on. Right. And that's particularly with the soil. And it's hard to know what's going on with the soil because every time you test it, conditions are different, even if you test it in the same place.
Thank you. Tom, I'm coming back to you on your example of buying a new tractor with the GPS, and I believe that is where I would like to know what was the motive at that stage in your farm business when you decided to bring something which were completely new, for example, for your father to see what is the value of this GPS. I mean, what was the reason behind that sort of decision in your case, and why? Because sometimes with the new technology, the difficulty is to realizing that value for the business. It might not be clear at the very early stages. You might see that you as a young farmer, but probably your father didn't see that value, and you made that decision. You bought a tractor with a GPS, and then after half an hour, he realized actually this makes a lot of sense. So what was the motive at that stage for you?
I mean, with the GPS, actually, it's a very, very easy return on investment that you can look at. You reduce overlap, you maximize the use of the resource, the inputs, and it's actually very, very simple. And that's, so I think that you can do a very clear calculation. You reduce overlap by 7 to 8%. You improve your fuel efficiency. You reduce your wear and parts cost. You reduce your time in the field, and you optimize the resource use efficiency. And something that Sophie said there about optimization rather than maximization. That as an industry, that's where we all need to be aiming, is about optimizing the resources, optimizing the outputs and the inputs. And that is what I think technology needs to drive, is that system which really maximizes our resource use efficiency and optimizes the inputs for the potential outputs. And I think far too often we're farming for a potential which is probably there 1 year in 10, rather than an average, which is what we should be doing, and trying to generate our returns on that. So I think that for me, the investment was very, very simple. Whereas on some of the other technologies, it's actually far more difficult to work out what the return on that investment is. And I think that's where the difficulty lies. And you then do it because you think you should be doing it, but actually then the proof over 5 years is, well, actually there's not been much benefit from doing that. So I think that's when it becomes more challenging.
Right. No, thank you so much. And I think probably the next question is, we need to probably ask a question about the way we innovate in a new technology. So I would like to see your view on what the technology providers or the companies and the organizations working on developing new solutions, how that relationship you think would be in order to develop a technology that can add values to your business, as you mentioned, Sophie. And I think that's a quite important engagement with the end users at the early stages. And obviously, you mentioned our satellite farm network, and then you are one of our network farmers, Sophie. So I just wanted to ask you maybe an open question about are we doing the innovation in a right way, or do we need to be more engaged with the end users and kind of bring them in a very early stage of the development in order to be able to develop a technology that can add real value to the business? So probably I'll go to Antony. I believe you have an interesting view on that question as well.
Yeah, I think, if you're alluding to that, is I suppose I came from an ag tech company before joining here, and so I've kind of been through these pain points of having to, trying to reach Tom, trying to reach Sophie, and agriculture doesn't have the benefit of the like we did. I used to work in the city, like being all in place, or in the media industry, all in one place, spread out. So there's a proximity issue, and with that proximity issue comes time and cost and resources. So going back and forth. So I fundamentally believe that ag techs need to come on farm, and it's almost like be incubated from within a grower or a farmer. They need to stop being developed off farm. So I think this is one of the we need to kind of this kind of co-development model, and a grower can really help de-risk that business in those early stages, help them with their product development. It's the product development cycle which is incredibly costly for an ag tech business, and getting it right. So if we can knock down that barrier, which currently exists, which is a very transactional, I'm only going to let you in when you're ready, when you give me the value. But actually, us as growers, we can really help them understand what is our problem, come and sit next on a daily basis, and then you might see something different anyway. So it's just sharing, being a bit more open with sharing what is like, this is costing me 2p a kilogram, about. So if you can help solve that and just being that kind of open. So if the ag tech was on farm and part of the farming business, it's almost like make farmers into ag tech businesses, integrate them. It's almost like everyone's got to kind of do their bit on the dairy side, whatever it may be. Maybe there'll always be leaders, but that's what the kind of approach we're taking here is bring the ag techs on farm, incubate them from within, and help them go faster. And with a kind of aggressive model like that. So it's a co-development model. So that's kind of, we can knock down some serious barriers there.
Yeah. And is that the reason for, I mean, you have a Bardsley England, the grower, but you have a Bardsley X. So that's almost like a tech arm of the business. Is that the way you
operate? So we called it Bardsley X. We set ourselves 10-year target to get this, accelerated and get this done. So we call it Tech X being 10. But essentially, X is a tech team of data engineers, software developers, but working with ag techs to get them adopted on farm, get our data sources that we need. So it's kind of an innovation team in house.
Okay, thank you, Tom.
Yeah, can I just come in on that? I think it's really interesting, Shamal. But Anthony, you said it at the start. Bardsley, England, are a huge business. You know, one of the largest in the UK. And so you have the ability to develop that technology on farm and probably the resource to enable that. Whereas the real challenge I see for the industry is that we are incredibly fragmented. We're a lot of very small businesses.
Yeah.
That then makes the adoption of the technology far, far more complicated. So if I were thinking about how do we influence the landscape of farming as a whole, you need to make sure that, I'd say that technology needs to be open source. It needs to be plug and play. It needs to be able to be utilized with different systems. Because actually, yeah, Anthony's business might be able to develop something which actually works within their business because of the structure of your business. But actually, most people will need to buy a technology that is able to be utilized straight away, provide a return almost immediately, and not go through those development phases. So all those development phases need doing before it gets to me as the primary producer, with the small nature of many of our businesses. So I think that you're looking at very different business structures for some of the big horticultural businesses. Some of the big poultry businesses will be very different to some of the more fragmented sort of smaller farming businesses.
Right. And is that the case, Sophie, in your?
Yes, I mean, I think that's right. There's certainly not a fit all for all systems and all sectors of the industry. And I think farmers generally feel bamboozled by people trying to sell product to them, whether that's agri-technology or other inputs. It certainly goes with the territory. But I feel that we only tend to hear about things when they've already got to market. I would like to hear much more about the early innovative stages of new technologies. And I know that Agri-EPI have hosted, conferences all over the world. And I would have been really interested to go to them as showcases to see what might become relevant, even if I wasn't able to implement it immediately. But they are very much geared towards the industry. I mean, tickets are, thousands of pounds. And so for a farming, arable, dairy business, I can't justify a ticket of £2,000 to go and see what's happening. And so I would like to, and also I feel that sometimes they're products which are looking for a problem to solve. Yeah. As Anthony said, it would just be good to be there at an earlier stage to say, God, it would really help me if I could find out the protein of my wheat when it's coming off the combine, as opposed to when I've dried it and tested it through an outside laboratory. There's a small example.
So what I can hear, Sophie, is almost like, making that bridge between the, let's say, the cohort of SMEs or startups or, companies with very early stage solutions with the end users and just making that exposure of the, the pipeline of development is happening. As you rightly said, we go into different events and, conferences where people are, presenting a very novel, very innovative ideas. As a sort of as an Agri-EPI center, we're thinking, well, that's great, but that might be 5 or 10 years from now. But probably the whole industry will not see that until it is ready. So I think there is probably an opportunity here for us as an organization to make that link better and providing the farmers and especially our farm network to have a pipeline of the technology development is going forward. So you have an idea where it was coming in the pipeline.
Can I also just comment now on one of my bête noires, one of my pet hates, is how incompatible everything is.
Yes.
The platform for your GPS yield mapping isn't compatible with the drone. That is so inefficient, and it makes you just think, oh, I can't spend the time or agonize over the technology to make this work. It's I know why it happens, because we're a society, an economic country that likes competition, and the best will get to the top. And of course, that has many, you know, positives. But in this case, I think it's a barrier for everyone.
Is that a barrier, Tom? You mentioned something around open system that farmers can plug in, you know, different solutions, almost like a sort of a modular system, if you like. So if I wanted a decision support system that can tell me where is the, you know, disease pressures are and how when I to apply my pesticides, so I can just plug into that system and get that information. You see, I mean, obviously that's a big problem for the whole industry, but is that a real barrier for that open system you mentioned?
Well, that's exactly what Sophie summarised there, was put into proper farmer language, I think, which I didn't achieve very well. But when I say open source, when I say plug and play, we need the compatibility of these different technologies. You know, it's just so infuriating that you can end up spending, I mean, we've had a piece of technology we were supposed to be trialling this harvest, and after my farm manager had spent X number of hours over the course of different days trying to get it working, we gave up because it just wasn't compatible with the different technologies. And you know, so it becomes incredibly frustrating. And actually, yeah, the best way to use technology, or the most powerful impact, is if you have it arrive on your farm, you install it, it works, and it makes a difference. If you have days or weeks of hassle to get something working before it's done anything, eventually you throw it in the bin and you just get rid of it. And that's then, so then actually it's a barrier to uptake of new technology, because of the past experiences have said, oh, this is just such a pain. And so there is that for me is one of the huge challenges. And I think that, you know, tractors are just about getting there with ISA bus technology, but even that isn't 100% compatible. But then you think we've got all these other technologies which are being developed, and how are we going to access and utilize the raw information that is contained within all those different systems? And for me, it's that's what scares me. And you know, the data side of it, I think, can be incredibly powerful, but only if we start being able to extract things out of it that change our management practices. And unless we start changing our management practices, it becomes valueless.
Right. I'm going to go to Antony and then Sophie. Antony,
yeah, I mean, to agree with Tom and Sophie, I mean, yeah, as a the technologies we bring in, it has to be, you know, you have to be able to extract the data that you say is a data collection tool. If it's not extractable and it's locked in its own ecosystem, it's a kind of almost a no starter for us, because this is a complex system. You be able to put it all into one place. It needs to be quite easy to do. So this is kind of a message to, obviously, to tech developers. There is no Amazon one-stop shop for ag tech. You know, do you know what I mean? There's no. I don't fundamentally believe there'll ever be an Amazon of ag tech. There just won't be. So if you're a tech company thinking you're going to be that, I think you just need to try to dial back the ambitions a little bit and not worry about, I'm going to hold on, I'm going to, you know, protect. I don't want anyone else to get, you know, anyway into my ecosystem. On the other side to this, I think what can facilitate this, and I say this is a call out to growers and farmers, is if you're going to hire someone in the very, very future, hire a data engineer or a data analyst who is not from a farming background or whatever it may be. They will also be able to help integrate these data, because also putting a lot of pressure on the ag techs who have limited resources to build these APIs, to build these open, you know, making sure it talks to the tractor, makes sure there's all these commercial conflicts. But if you are on farm, you can just deal with that and bring it together, you actually find your adoption will actually go up. You know, and your insights would massively increase anyway. But so it's a kind of two sides. There's two sides to this kind of thing, and I think it's so. I don't think it's a technology problem. I think it's also a people problem.
Sophie?
Yeah, I think it is a training problem, but I think that agroecology, agri-tech, the platforms, the data analysis, it's incredibly clunky. You know, on the one part of our lives, we've got iPhones, which are mini computers, and yet you go to your platform for yield mapping and it's like going back to the dark ages. So I hear what you say, Antony. I use a computer WizKid to help me, but it's expensive.
Yeah.
And every time you have another incompatible platform, it's more expensive. And then you build up these, you know, overhead, these endless subscriptions to different components of your data collection. It's a big overhead.
And it comes back to a critical part of the end of my talk this morning. It's the profit part that enables you to invest in these technologies and to get the most out of them. And you know, the data analyst is something that I know there's 4 estates up in Norfolk that have grouped together and employed a data analyst, but they're covering thousands of acres. You know, it's something that it's not within the grasp of most average farmers. You know, it's just, I'm afraid yes, the theory is great, and I would love to be able to make far better use of the information I have here. But it's, you know, the reality of that, I'm afraid, is that probably it's actually where we need to start utilizing our agronomists, our specialists more, because I think their advice is going to be, these people that are our consultants are going to be giving very, very different advice over the next 5 to 10 years than they have over the previous decade. But it's a huge shift for them from being an advisor on sort of integrated farm management approaches and plant protection products and the traditional word, definition of the agronomist, to them becoming a technology specialist. I mean, wow, that's something. It's a completely different job.
Yeah, well, I think that's probably, you know, it's one of the key for unlocking the adoption of technology as well, in order to help farmers to take through that journey and realize the value of the technology, but also to overcome all these challenges in using different systems, and you know how this machine works with this drones or map or whatever application they got on the farm. So I think is that what we are suggesting is a need for changes in the skill set of the advisors and the agronomists to be more on a data side, or do we need a data companies or organizations to have a different business model working with farmers? So as you most of you have an agronomist is coming to your farm and providing an agronomy advice, you might have another companies providing a data advice and helping with that process. Is that another burden on the farm, or is it going to take some of the hassle away from the farmers and make sure they're focusing on their farm and they don't worry about the data analysis and all these problems with technology?
But for me, it comes down to the risk and reward.
Right.
You know, this is the unknown. Is what is the return going to be from employing that person, from taking that specialist advice? And you know, I think it's amazing that we've been using spatial variability techniques for over 20 years now, and yet very, very few businesses can tell you whether they're better off by doing it. Yeah, that to me is just, in a snapshot, that is one of the fundamental challenges that we face.
Yes.
I think that comes down to not being able to see, certainly from our side. Can you hear me? Sorry. I think that comes down to not being able to see yield. And if you can't see yield real time, you can't see what that tech, you put that tech in, and then what's the impact it has? We can't find out till later what the impact is, and it's really hard to see it. But if you can see, if you did some change and you see the change in your yield or see the change in performance of that plant or whatever it may be, you can start to quickly understand if that's performing better. So it goes back to visibility. It goes back to visibility in our business. So try to chicken and egg a little bit. But
Helen, do you like to comment on that? Helen, can you hear me? Probably not.
Not there.
Right. Do you want to coming into that? So in terms of the advice and farmer support, do you think there is a role for some advisory role for data and technology, or is there something that the current agronomists can develop that skill set, and is going to help the adoption of technology going forward?
I think if the data was more available and user friendly, I'd like to be able to look at it myself and draw comparisons. There's some other nearby farmers here, and clusters, as we know, are quite a big movement at the moment. And we're considering a cluster just for our soil health, as well as diversity, but biodiversity. But I think that it's having comparisons as well. We can just operate in a kind of echo chamber. I know we do benchmarking, but that tends to be about cost and yields. I think it would be very interesting to look at some of the other ecological factors in our farms, and do that on a cluster benchmarking basis.
Thank you. Well, my last question for you would be, what's your key message for the technology developers going forward in order to be able to develop technology that is relevant, add value, and making a difference on the farm businesses? So probably start with Antony first.
I mean, I'll just guide the technology developers right now in terms of, I think, again, it's so obvious, but focus your solutions right now on, let's just say, climate change. Focus on soil. I mentioned it earlier. Focus on how can we be more efficient. Even Denmark, I think Lloyd's mentioned it as well. It's in the centre of everything now. Tom mentioned that the yields this year are massively down to the climate. So we are contributors as an industry to this issue, and we can have an argument all day long, who drove that. But I think we also we are the only industry right now in the world that can be the solution to this problem. We can all talk about what the oil industry wants to do about pulling carbon out of the atmosphere, but guess we do this on a daily basis. So we should lead from the front. We should be top of everyone's agenda right now, governments, everything else. We are the only industry that can lead us out of this problem, and this climate change also improves our health, whatever it may be. So I would urge technology companies to focus on carbon solutions, how we can increase our carbon into the soil. I would also say technology to kind of help us lift the value. We talk about food being really, we've got to make it cheap as possible, but how can we use technology to augment, for example, how much nutrient density is in our food, and then connecting that to the consumer, showing that actually our food is medicine, and actually it is worth paying a bit more. So it's just changing, helping us connect better to the consumer, look at that kind of space. And that might release some more capital for investment into, us as growers and producers to invest in the land, essentially. And then, help us lower our risk on the farm, if you're going to focus on that. So help us lower our risk to adoption. And my kind of final message would be, really open to the idea of a co-development model. I think co-develop with the farmer, work with the farmer daily. Go spend time with Sophie, sit next to Sophie on a daily basis, and go that early stage. Spend more time, being on farm and understanding the problem, and be a bit more open-minded to kind of co-developing, because then there'll be some certain innovators in our industry who will always get you welcome on farm, like Andrew Francis on the potato side, for example. But work with them, get your product to stage, and then you'll be able to go down to the kind of people who will never be those early adopters. There'll always be early adopters, and there'll always be late adopters. So hunt out those early adopters, spend some time with them, work with them to understand your product and develop that faster.
Thank you. Sophie?
Well, I can echo many of the things that Antony said, but relevance and user friendliness. And I think one of the big barriers is finance. So however one can be creative about how these things are financed, because, a lot of farms are debt ridden at the moment, and we're going into an uncertain future. So I think it needs to be collaborative development. To expect a farmer just to pay and take out probably more financing for something that might be obsolete in 5 years' time, or even less. It's that FOMO thing. I'm missing out. I'm going to buy an iPhone this month, and there's a better one next month. So that is a barrier. Yeah.
Thank you. And Tom?
I just want to say that I love what Sophie said earlier about the clusters, because I think the clusters have proved themselves to work really well environmentally, but I think actually we can learn a lot by collaborating on a production level as well, and I think that's something that can really help drive forward. And I actually think it's easier for a technology developer or provider to work with a larger cluster who maybe can pull the required finance together than with the individuals across that cluster. So I think there is a really interesting model there that can hopefully help drive forward the adoption of technology, but maybe lowering the risk. So I think that can work really well. But there are so many challenges, but I think that the technology developers need to focus on this. What is their solution going to be to a particular challenge? Because if they just look at climate change as being a challenge, I think it's too big a challenge, and we need to break it down into the individual parts. And one of those challenges that I see is nitrogen use efficiency. For me, that probably is the biggest contributor of arable farming, and so that's where there needs to be focus as to how can we make more efficient use of that nitrogen. What does it look like? How do we utilize it? And then work on that as the solution for that particular challenge, rather than the big picture issue.
Thank you very much. Thanks to the panelists, and I hope you enjoyed listening to the discussion, and I'm sure there is going to be more questions coming through to the